Hi, today we're going to be talking about some jazz piano concepts. And the first one I want to share with you is the idea of reading lead sheets. Instead of having all the notes spelled out for you on the page, basically what you're going to see is what we have here on the piano, and that is a copy of the melody and some chord changes that are written over the melody, and then you, as a performer, get to decide how do you want to interpret those. So it gives you a little more artistic license and freedom to do with it what you will. Now, of course, there's some parameters with that, and we're going to talk about those as we go through the video series. The first concept I want you to look at that will help you know how to do those chord changes is chord qualities. And what we're going to do is take a look at the different types of chord qualities we deal with initially. The first one is just a major 7 chord quality, and if we start on the note C, then we get this chord. Okay, so if you listen to that chord, we have the C, the E, the G, and the B natural, which gives us the major 7 chord. It's all of the notes right out of the C scale. We get the C major 7 chord. We're going to use that chord quite a bit. If we lower the highest note, the 7th, by a half step, then we're going to have C, E, G, and B flat. And that chord we're going to call a dominant 7 chord. And we're going to use that chord quality probably more than any other chord in jazz music. When we get to the blues that we're going to talk about later, it's all of the blues pretty much is made up of that chord, the dominant chord. And then finally, if we lower the 3rd note of the chord from E to E flat, then we get a minor 7 chord. And again, we're going to use that chord quite a bit in the pieces that we're playing in jazz, but not as much probably as the dominant 7 chord. Okay, so if you take any other key, let's go to the key of F. We play the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th in the key of F. That gives us our major 7 chord. So any key you're in, you can still find those parts of the chord. Again, if we lower the 7th from E to E flat, there is our dominant 7 chord. And then if we lower the 3rd of the chord, we get our minor 7 chord. So primarily the pieces that we're going to be working on initially use those 3 chord qualities, the major 7 chord, the dominant 7 chord, and the minor 7 chord. I would encourage you to learn those in every key possible, and then we'll look at how to incorporate them in combination in all of the keys. Good luck. All right, we've taken a look at the different chord qualities that we're using initially in jazz, and now we want to talk about the piano player's responsibility in covering some of those notes. And in this example, we're going to look at what's called 3-note voicing. And in 3-note voicing, in our left hand, we want to play the root of the chord, and in our right hand, we want to play the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. So if we play a B flat chord, for example, we're going to play the B flat in our left hand, and the D and the A flat in our right hand. Okay, if you take a look at the 3 notes we just played, we played a B flat dominant 7 chord. So the B flat, the root of the chord in the bass, the D the 3rd, and the A flat the 7th to give us our dominant chord. Now we're going to look at various types of voicing or different ways to play the chords, but the one we're going to start with is the 3-note voicing. And basically what we want you to do is play the root of the chord in your left hand, the 3rd and the 7th of the chord in your right hand. Now we're going to experiment with ways to do that, even different voicings within the 3-note voicing, but initially we just want to play B flat, D, and A flat. Okay? Now, if we want to play other chords involved in, say, a blues piece, like the Blues by 5, if we go to the E flat chord, here's our E flat, the root of the chord. We want the 3rd. Well, what is the 3rd of E flat? It's G. So we're going to move the A flat down a half step to the G, that gives us our third. And what's the seventh of the E flat chord? It's the D flat. Well, we were already playing D, so we just moved down a half step and we have the seventh there. So there's our E flat 7 chord. And then the other chord that we would use in Blues by 5 is the F chord. So we have F. Again, we want the third, the A, and the seventh. The seventh of F is E flat. So that gives us our dominant 7 on F. And again, your right hand is only going to be moving very little here, hopefully mostly half steps as you play. So if we play the chord progression of Blues by 5, we get this. B flat again, then we have E flat here. Notice my right hand only moved half steps, back to B flat, then F, and B flat. So very little motion in our right hand as we change from chord to chord, but we're covering the responsibilities of making sure the chord sounds full by making sure we play the third of the chord, which determines whether it's a major or minor chord, and the seventh of the chord to determine whether it's major or dominant or minor 7. All right, experiment with that, play some of the Blues by 5, and again, I always encourage you to, once you feel like you know that pretty well, to try to do that in other keys also. Okay, we've taken a look at the different chord qualities we might use to begin with in jazz, and now we're going to focus in even a little more on the dominant chord qualities that we'll use when we're playing blues. It's a good place to start in jazz because we only use dominant chords, so we're going to take a look at those first. So again, if we're thinking in the key of B flat, the first dominant chord we would use would be the B flat dominant chord with that lowered seventh, which would sound like this. Okay, we've talked about several different chord qualities, but in the blues, we primarily use the dominant 7 chords. And today we're going to take a look at Red Garland's Blues by 5. That's in the key of B flat, which is the key I just played, the chord I just played. So there's the B flat dominant chord. This piece also uses the E flat dominant chord. So we go E flat, the third is G, the fifth is B flat, the seventh is D flat. So we're going to use the E flat dominant 7 chord, and we're going to use the F dominant 7th chord, F, A, C, and E flat. So basically this whole piece is made up of those 3 chords, the B flat 7 chord, the E flat 7 chord, and the F 7 chord. Now we've talked about earlier the 3-note voicing idea where we play the root in the bass and the third and the seventh in our right hand. So you'll notice that's what we have here. The B flat chord, instead of playing it in order, we're breaking it up a bit. The root is in our left hand, the third is here, and the seventh is here. We can do the same thing with the E flat chord, root in the bass. Now, where is the third of the E flat chord? It's a G. So all we have to do is move the A flat down a half step to here, and the seventh is D flat here. I'm going to finger that strangely just so you can see those notes. So, check that out. All we had to do was move a half step with our right hand, both notes, and we have our E flat dominant 7 chord. And then in this particular piece, it goes back to the B flat dominant 7 chord. So we're right back where we began. And then finally the F 7 chord, F in the bass. And now we're going to move both notes in our right hand up a half step. So we get the E flat and A, the third of the F chord, and the seventh of the F chord. There it is, and then we come back down the half step in our right hand for the B flat. So there's very little motion in our right hand as we change chords. Let me play the accompaniment track for you with this, and we will play along with it and watch particularly the right hand and see how little motion there is from note to note. right, so hopefully you noticed, I know it's maybe difficult to see with my hand in the way, but very little motion from chord to chord. The B flat chord here, the E flat chord here, we moved back to the B flat chord, and then the F chord, and back to the B flat chord. So I encourage you to experiment with the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord in that blues piece. Play along with the accompaniment track, and when you feel comfortable with that, maybe even attempt to play that same idea in various keys, maybe in the key of F or in the key of C. Give that a shot and see what you think. Good luck. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the chords you would use in playing a blues piece. Now we're going to talk about the scale you might use initially when you are improvising over a blues piece. And we would use what's called a blues scale. And in this case, the B flat blues scale sounds like this. Okay, the notes I just played are the notes for a B flat blues scale. And you'll notice we started on B flat. We played the minor third of the B flat scale, which is D flat. We played the 4th note of the scale is E flat. We played a flat 5, which is F flat. Yes, on the keyboard it looks like I'm playing the E key, because I am, but it's still, in theory, we're going to call it the flat 5, so it's F flat. Then the 5th of the scale, which is F, a flat 7, which is the A flat, and that brings us back to the B flat. Now, if you use that pattern, 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, and 1 again, or 8, starting on any key, you can play a blues scale in any key. But in this case, the blues in B flat scale are those pitches. Now, in the piece Blues by 5, we can use those notes in any combination to play an improvised solo over the chord changes of Blues by 5. So take a listen to this. I've got an accompaniment track that we're going to play with that, and I'll play a solo for you just using the blues scale. Okay, I would encourage you to experiment with that, and the neat thing about the blues scale is really there's not a wrong note. You can use any of those notes in any combination when you're playing a blues piece, and you can solo over it and feel pretty confident about it. Now, we're not going to always do that when we're playing blues pieces, but that's a great place to start. So I'd encourage you to experiment with improvising using the blues scale on Blues by 5. Okay, now we're going to take a look at where in the major scale we get these different chord qualities from. The major 7 chord is based on the 1st note of the scale. The dominant 7 chord that we talked so much about with the blues piece is based on the 5th note of the major scale. And then we're going to talk also about the minor 7 chord, which is based on the 2nd note of the scale. So let's review. Here's the major 7 chord. All right, so if we just take our C major scale, all the white keys, all naturals, and take the 1st note, the 3rd note, the 5th note, and the 7th note, we get a C major 7 chord. Okay, now in the same scale, if we move up to the 5th note, which is G, and we play the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th notes from G, we get this sound. Now you'll notice the 3rd of the chord is still major, but when we get to the 7th, it's not a major sound like we had earlier. With the C major 7 chord, we had this sound. with the G sound, we have the 7th lowered, and so we get the dominant chord that we've been talking about. So if from any scale you're using, if you start on the 5th note of the scale and play the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, you will get the dominant chord of that key. If we start on the 2nd note of the scale, we're in the key of C, so we start on D, and again play the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th of that chord, we get a minor 7 chord. And again, regardless of the key you're in, if you start on the 2nd note of that scale, you're going to get a minor 7 chord. Now, some people think of it a different way. They think of it as, if we have the G scale, if we had a major 7, we'd have the F sharp, so we're flatting the 7th or lowering the 7th a half step to get a dominant 7 chord. For the minor 7 chord, if we're in the key of D, a D major 7 chord would be D, F sharp, A, and C sharp. So we're lowering the 7th and we're lowering the 3rd to get our minor 7 chord. So that's really two ways you can think about arriving at dominant 7 chords and minor 7 chords. You can think of the key we're in and think of it as the 5 of that key, or you can think of it as for the minor 7 chord, think of it as the 2 of that chord, and it will give you the correct notes. Or for the dominant chord, you can think of lowering the 7th from a major chord, and you have the dominant 7. And for the minor 7, you're lowering the 7th and lowering the 3rd. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the jazz theory end of things, but just so you know, that's kind of how these all relate to the major scale. So if we have the 1 chord, we have the major sound. If we have the 5 chord, we have the dominant sound. And the 2 chord, we have the minor 7 sound. And we can go back to the dominant. And finally and that sounds like it ends. That's the tonic of that key, so it ends on the 1 chord. So experiment with, in different keys, can you find the dominant chords and the minor 7 chords that occur naturally in all of the different keys? Take a look at those and see what you think.